Segment 7, Nikud Shalosh, Nikud Zayin. Im tuchal le'ozreinu, v'shamatnu b'kol Elohecha. Im tuchal le'ozreinu, v'shamatnu b'kol Elohecha. This section will explain how to describe consequences of a proposed course of action. Now, that proposed course of action may consist either of a warning, such as, if you spend all your money today, and then a consequence would follow, or the proposed course of action may consist of an invitation, such as you find in the heading here, if you are able to help us, and then a consequence follows. Several units earlier, we learned a way to express consequence using the particle as, meaning then. When it comes to conditional statements, however, the more typical way for Hebrew to express a consequence, that is, the second half, the apodosis portion of a conditional statement, is not with the particle as, but rather employing a particular verb form which we're about to learn. And that verb form itself will signal the consequence portion of the conditional statement, the apodosis. In the heading, we see that exemplified in the expression v'shamatnu. V'shamatnu is a katal form, shamatnu, with the prefixed conjunction vav. The meaning is, then we will hear, or in the larger setting, we will obey. Please notice that although the expression v'shamatnu is comprised in part of a katal form, it is not rendered past, but routinely rendered future. Please also notice that v'shamatnu does not stand alone. It does not begin a new sentence or paragraph, but follows closely as a latter portion of a sequential presentation. The preceding portion was the if portion of the conditional clause, which we call the prodosis, im tuchal, and so forth. When a katal verb is configured like v'shamatnu with a prefixed vav, and when it yields a meaning that resembles a yiktol form that is often future, this is known as a vav conversive v'katal. We are careful to say that it is the combination of these elements. The word is spelled as a vav conjunction with katal, yet it yields the meaning like a yiktol, often future. When these coalesce, then it's known as a vav conversive v'katal. As you'll notice in the footnote, not every v'katal experiences this conversion from past tense to future. There are some v'katals which are not vav conversive. They are simple v'katals, known more accurately as vav copulative v'katals. They retain their past tense meaning. We are here introducing the vav conversive v'katals in their capacity to open up the second part of a conditional sentence, the then portion, known as the apodosis. Please be aware that this is not the only setting within which a vav conversive v'katal can operate. It's not limited to the second half of a conditional statement. In fact, if one were simply laying out a sequence, notice the operative condition, a sequence of expected future events, the customary way to do this in Biblical Hebrew would be a sequence, a series of vav conversive v'katals. Next, concerning this fact that yiktols and vav conversives both tend to be future-oriented, they do enjoy a differentiating feature. A vav conversive v'katal will connect to preceding action or actions in a sequential or consequential manner. In contrast, a yiktol form would not produce such a connection with preceding events, but rather would stand alone. As suggested by the footnote, this may remind you of how a vayiktol also operates in sequence, a series of past narrative events. You might think of the vav conversive v'katal as the future-oriented version of the vayiktol, which operates in the past. Let's summarize what we've seen thus far concerning the vav conversive v'katal. First, it's capable of much of the range of meaning associated with the yiktol. So far, we've specified in particular its future orientation. But just as the yiktol is not limited to future but may include potential, inceptive, iterative, durative, or modal, the v'katal is capable of that same range of meaning. Next, like its sister form, the vayiktol, the v'katal will tend to appear first in its clause. And third, also like the vayiktol, a vav conversive v'katal will connect to preceding material with a sense of either logical or temporal sequence. Just as we're seeing in the example in the heading, the vav conversive v'katal is functioning as the apodosis, the then portion, which necessarily follows the if portion of the conditional statement. As was observed earlier, not every instance of a v'katal is a vav conversive, that is, a tense-shifting v'katal. Some v'katals do not shift tense, but simply will be translated as the conjunction vav and a past tense katal. Perhaps you're wondering regarding recognizing the vav conversive v'katals from those v'katals which are not vav conversive, known as vav copulative. There are two parts of the conjugation that will distinguish themselves as vav conversive v'katals. It has to do with the accentuation. Please refer to the footnote where you will find that in the case of the vav conversive v'katals, the accent for first common singulars will move to the final syllable, and similarly, second masculine singulars. Here then is the vav conversive v'katal, v'shamarti, in contrast to the vav copulative, the plain v'katal, which is v'shamarti. Similarly, with second masculine singular, vav copulative v'katal with accent on the last syllable, v'shamarta, in contrast to v'shamarta. Admittedly, this only accounts for two of the various conjugated forms, but when we encounter them, we can be absolutely sure that these indeed were intended as vav conversive v'katals. In other cases, we'll have to depend on context to recognize vav conversives over against the ones that do not have this tense shifting implication, that is, the vav copulatives. To reinforce how the vav conversive v'katals will introduce the second part of a conditional statement, you see before you a collection of unconnected conditional statements. In the right-hand column, you'll see the if clause, the protasis. In the left-hand column, you'll find the then clause, the apodosis, in each of which the first form is a vav conversive v'katal. Let's look them over. Aleph. Im yivada ki nitan li chameshet shekalim. Im yivada ki nitan li chameshet shekalim. And now the apodosis, beginning with a vav conversive v'katal, v'shamarti otam, v'shamarti otam. Incidentally, notice this is a first common singular, and the accent is on the final syllable. This is making it very clear that we have here a vav conversive v'katal, not just a simpler, the one without a tense shift, known as a vav copulative v'katal. Pause the video for a moment and fill in the blanks that appear in the column on the left. Beit. Im ye'amer lamelech ki anashim ra'im ba'im. Im ye'amer lamelech ki anashim ra'im ba'im. And now the then clause. V'kara et tzva'av lishmor et ha'ir. V'kara et tzva'av lishmor et ha'ir. Example Gimel. אם יינתן לפנינו לחם חג גדול. אם יינתן לפנינו לחם חג גדול. ואכלנו עד אשר נשבע. ואכלנו עד אשר נשבע. Example ד' אם מגדל גדול ייבנה בחול. אם מגדל גדול ייבנה בחול. Now the apodicis. ונפל פתאום. ונפל פתאום.